That is correct. I was the lead designer for that, and it was a kind of pilot project here in the US, very high recognized. And we did team together with a large engineering group from Copenhagen called Ramble. They are also having offices in Germany and in many other parts of the world. We are thinking the solution has to be that we have to bring different professions together and work more in a collaborative way, and not to be stuck in silos. So that we made a very big transition. The group I'm leading is called Livable City Lab, which integrates a lot of the environmental topics with better city planning. But you're right, my personal background is I first started as a landscape architect. I also started as an activist, like bringing art into the cities, and I have started my own company in 1980 in Germany, and then I started to connect to a more larger connection with this big firm called Ramble in Scandinavia.
Yes. And then we meet each other on the Brownfield conference, the first time in Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania last year in December. And by chance, we stand together in the lobby, and later I hear your lesson about a very interesting blue-green infrastructure project in Singapore. And that will lead us to the topic of our webinar, the rediscovery of urban open spaces to be climate ready and livable. I'm very expectantly. Please, it's your turn, Mr. Dreiseitl.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and I will try to go to the next slides. Let me see how I can do that here from my side. Maybe just I probably need a very quick point to get to the next slide. Let me just see how I can do that in the best way. Okay, maybe I have to do it down here. So I will just go with the slides a little bit through something. I'm very fascinated always before we see to find solutions on brownfield redevelopment and all that. I'm always interested to look first, also when I'm teaching at universities like Singapore or Harvard, to look at the potential what living systems like water streams can offer. Resiliency, what we are talking today about being climate ready and all this, is something we can actually learn from a very natural way of how water actually is streaming and how water is creating a balance between too dry or too wet. It's creating a kind of retention system. Like rivers are never straight, they actually take a very, very long way. And when you actually go to looking into the landscape before we get to solutions, we can also see that actually landscapes in general have a very resilient structure. Today in our cities, we have to say we lost this intelligence of nature, and it's actually very, very interesting to adapt this kind of logic, what we can see in a natural environment, and to bring it into our cities. The big challenge, as we know, is that more and more cities are getting more and more dense, more and more people living in cities. So there is a conflict of space. There is a conflict of using this space in a very smart and clever way. And it's often that we have the infrastructure and also, of course, the value of water and green we put very often to the backside. It's something nice to have, but if we don't have the space, we actually ignore it or we bring the backside. I know that there is a totally different way we need to work, much more in a partnership with the environment, also in our dense cities. And the logic is very clear. I mean, if we look at the water regime of a natural environment, there is a lot of evaporation, there is a lot of cooling effect. If we go to agriculture, if we go to the urban fabric, we find direct runoff, we find a lot of pollution goes into rivers. And especially also here in the US, we have combined sewer overflows all the time. We bring pollution into our streams and into our rivers. And we actually lose a lot of the fresh water, and that is a real problem, a real dilemma. If I just may talk a bit about climate change, also here out of a US perspective. The average of all the research around the world is actually coming to the same conclusion. very often the average of rain is not so much different, but the intensity is changing. So we have, for example, on one spot, an enormous amount of water coming down, and other parts with no drop at all. So we have to balance this much better. And I think this problem about going into the extreme into our cities, this is a very, very specific topic, which is also what people actually feel and experience in mega cities. And we have to find better solutions to that. I just give you one example. In front of my own office in Boston, we had 4 extreme storm events in a row now this year. And we had the highest water level ever measured in Boston. It was in front of my office that the streets had the ocean came so high that the front part was completely covered with seawater, and it was so cold that some of the cars were frozen in this ice water. So the reality about climate change and also the extremes we have, this is not something for the future. This is something which is actually happening right now, and people can feel that. So we have to find much better solutions. A lot of challenges are not only about too much water, also too little. Heat extremes in the US, we have the problem that we have air pollution, we have noise pollution. There's lots of things which are all reasons to create more healthy cities and to integrate better the water system. I would like to give you some examples, maybe about our research and our attitude, how we work in this field. We're trying to find solutions on small and large scale. And actually what it is about is using any opportunity in a city. Is this a little pocket park or to a large infrastructure, or also streets, to be more adaptive, more resilient to what is happening and to balance the extremes. For example, instead of using everything underneath in pipes, to use the city in itself, starting from the rooftops to the street scale, also very often small scale projects, to do the homework in front of our doorstep and not to put everything at the end of the pipe solution. So that is a very, very important part I think we have to come up with. And I just like to illustrate this very simple with some graphics. The traditional gray engineering is basically we want to get rid of water, we want to bring it into pipes out of the city. We have a treatment maybe at the end if it's a combined or separated sewer system. And we use basically the city as a drainage system to get rid of water. I think in the future, we have to get more an integrated approach to decentralize our systems and to use the intelligence of nature and to bring it actually back into our cities. Let me just explain that very simple on one example. I take here Singapore. I was very influential in Singapore for the ABC water guidelines, and our entire team was very intensely working for the last 10 years in the city. We came up with basically the guidelines for the entire city. What we are trying to do is that we collect every drop of rainwater in the city, bring it not only on the surface, but also to treat it in different ways. We'll come to that. But collect it and also store it and recycle and reuse it. Singapore is doing a big job to collect every drop of rainwater in the city and is using actually every drop in the city as a capacity to finally bring the water clean into a lagoon system, and from this lagoon system we use it even as a drinking water capacity. This is something which has to be done now on many, many different levels. The ABC water guidelines in Singapore is starting on reopening and changing canals and streams, and I would just like to mention a little bit about how we do that. Instead of having everything in drains to get rid of the water as quick as possible, we have to get to a more integrated approach. And we have to find any opportunities, starting from daylighting forgotten streams, bringing them into the city in different ways. And that means also that we have to create ways to really make from a concrete gray solutions to a more integrated blue-green solution. In this case here in Singapore, we even start to use a lot of different parks and open spaces. We recycle material and reuse it, for example, here. We bring bioengineering techniques, what we also use a lot in Germany on restoring streams instead of concrete, to use living material and plants to stabilize and to avoid erosion. We are doing this in a large scale here in Singapore. And we actually change a lot of these infrastructure systems completely from a gray to a more integrated blue-green infrastructure. Well, this has many effects. On one side, it can we can hold back an enormous amount of water when it starts to rain. Singapore has monsoon rains which are unbelievable, nothing to compare to our normal or to our big rain showers we have maybe in Germany. We have to capture this water in the city and slow it down. The side effect is also that the city is getting much better from a climate, microclimate aspect. And also people really love this kind of environment. I will just give you some impressions. This is after a big storm event where we actually can flood the entire region. We have a special safety and a safety system so that people actually leave this place and go out. But we use the city and the city park as a big retention and detention facility to slow down the process. 2 days later, this can be used, and it's a multifunctional, flexible space where people get close to water, where people experience the beauty of water, so that people are not only afraid about infrastructure and about hiding everything away, but also integrating it in the day-to-day life. And I just give you this example. A lot of people who grow up in cities, children, have a very, very limited access to the natural environment. I mean, they live in air-conditioned systems and in-house, indoors. And it is so important for them to understand how is a natural environment working and how can we make our city more sustainable and more livable. And there's very simple things like, you know, the beauty to see a dragonfly or to touch a frog. A lot of kids in modern cities are totally afraid about nature, and we have to create a kind of better understanding and a better connection to that. Well, these are large infrastructures, but you can also do it on small infrastructures, just as a typical example. The side effect is also that if we are more working with towards an integration of the environmental topics in our cities, we can create a much better lifestyle. I think there are so many points we have to address today about health. We have enormous amounts of people, especially here also in America, you can see that, but all around the world, that people don't move anymore, that people are overweight, people have big health problems like diabetes. People have depressions because they don't move and they don't get out. They have not daylight and not fresh air. So we have to do anything we can to create also our cities more livable. And that's where actually landscape architecture and engineering and city planning comes together. And that's actually very much what I'm trying to do. Well, a little more from an engineering point. There are lots of ways how to work in a better way with water and with engineering solutions. There are always two sides of the coin. One is working with quality, and one is working with quantity. We have many opportunities, not only in parks, but also on buildings, to work much more strategic and much more clever to really come up with solutions which bring all the functions on filtration, sedimentation, conveyance, slowing down the process and storing it. And I will give you one little example. I mean, you can start on buildings, and we have done that in large scale. I did work with Renzo Piano for the Potsdamer Platz in Berlin. And what most people don't know is that this was the largest project at this time in the world about an integrated stormwater and rainwater management system in a city. So at Potsdamer Platz, we have more than 50% green roofs, extensive green roofs, where we start already to filter water. From there, we bring the water into cisterns, and we use the water, we recycle water also for toilet flashing, and we use it also for shopping malls and for greenery. The rest of this water actually is going into a lagoon system. The lagoon in itself can have flexible water levels. So when there's a lot of rain, the water level goes up. When it's a dry period, the water level can go down. And it is a very interesting and efficient way also to handle and to hold back and to use water more carefully and to make more sense with this environment. Potsdamer Platz has, of course, a very extreme design solution. You cannot do this everywhere. We have open lagoons, only fed by rainwater. We have a special filtration system where we actually circulate the water in the summertime. We don't put any chemicals into it. We use the natural filtration system of roots of a cleansing biotope, where the water is filtered through a substrate, and the plant material and the root system is basically doing with microorganisms a job to clean the water. Well, this kind of integrated approach can also be beautiful. And I think that's a very important part. That's also what we try around the world when we work also on brownfield solutions, to celebrate, not only to have technical solutions to solve a problem, but to turn the problem around and to make it as a solution which brings new possibilities into a city. You can do so much better things, bringing actually beauty and engineering together, and being smart in a way also about energy, being smart about combining recycling systems and to reduce the carbon footprint we have in our cities. Well, I give you one example here from Tanner Springs Park in Portland. That was also a pilot project. This was actually very much a brownfield site. Portland, a typical, very interesting city in US, one of the most green cities in US. They had a town center, typical the grid, and they had a big part of the city, which is actually this part here, which was totally just industry, rails, shops, and so on. We changed that Pearl District completely, and I'll give you one example, what we did. All the new buildings, and sometimes also recycling of old buildings, are collecting, capturing water, and we bring it into a public park. This public park has different functions, of course, evaporation and infiltration, and we can circulate the water in this park, and we bring finally totally clean water out. What is very important on such projects, because it's the public realm, you have to get the people on board. And this is something I'm doing with my teams since many, many decades and years. We are trying to involve the local people in the decision, into the design process even. Here, a stakeholder involvement project where we had 300 citizens from that area. And we had an open workshop where we created a kind of vision for the future for this Pearl District with the local people. If you involve people, and not only giving a kind of nice show, but really let their voices and their dreams and their visions come up in a discussion, and bring people, empower people to actually to expose them to new ideas, and also let them create new ideas, you will have a much better political background. That is very, very important for politicians to make decisions, and it's also very, very important for stakeholders to be involved and to finance such projects. There's a lot I could say about that, but I just like to mention it that this project was very, very much with stakeholder involvement and cities involvement. We even have recycled a lot of the material. We recycled the old train tracks to an art piece. People love this park. People have take ownership. It's interesting that there is a whole group of volunteers who start to clean up the park, so we have much less maintenance costs than other parks. Teachers are using this for open classrooms, like clean, green classrooms outside. We can find even ospreys catching fish in this park. So it's a very interesting way of bringing a modern park and also nature back into that. You can even see that sometimes there are art performance on weekends. So a very, very dynamic and very interesting integrated solution. Finally, maybe I'll give you some short intro about what we do on solutions which are based to the cloudburst projects. We are working here in US on very much integration of engineering solutions. Like here, we're actually working for New York City, for Queens, to come up with integrated approaches. We do cost-benefit analysis. We work on the question, if a city would invest in green infrastructure, how can they save money in the future where they usually have otherwise problems? We do it very often in our teams here in the US with brownfield recycling or projects in a very simple way. We make sketches. We make often sketches on site with people, show how could they look like, and so that really gives a very, very interesting way of process, of an integrated process also in the planning. We do, for example, work on resilient coastal solutions. This one is a project where we are working in Washington. And Washington is very much in danger that because of sea level rise, a lot of the parts can be flooded. So we create a kind of living seawall, and we combine this with an integrated approach about stormwater management. This is a very interesting way to work with. And what is important, especially here in the US, but I think also all around the world, is how to invest in the most clever way budgets. It is very expensive for cities in future if they do nothing. And you can actually also show that and calculate that. If you invest into better infrastructure, you should do it now. And what we also do with our cost-benefit analysis, we are really counting also on the co-benefits, on the added values, what infrastructure can bring to the cities. And we encourage investors which are usually not willing to invest in such things, but who would get a lot of benefit. We are looking very much for public-private partnerships for them to see where their value is and how wise it would be for them to invest in the right moment. And that is a very successful way to work with. And you can also show what would happen if you do nothing in the next years. Where would be the damage, the floodings? What would be if you invest in different solutions? And of course, you have to find the optimum. For that, it brings me to the last slides. And let me just talk a little bit about our research work. We are very strong connected, and I'm personally also doing a lot of research with my wife in the field of blue-green infrastructure around the world. We did a research work funded by the Rumble Foundation, which is actually a very interesting way. We are owned by a foundation, and so we can actually work in many different fields. We did compare European, American, and Asian solutions, and we wanted to figure out, is there a difference in decision processes? What are the conditions to make projects work, and what are the constraining conditions that projects are not coming about? It was a very interesting result. We figured out whatever regime you have, it's very, very similar. the problems and the solutions look very, very much the same in the different fields. And I just give you one example. I mean, we looked very much on the initial conditions, on also on the constraining conditions. There's a very important part of that decision process that we are usually only looking at real estate development, but the real values of blue-green infrastructures are on many different fields. This research work was done by Harvard, MIT, Harvard GSD, MIT in Boston. Then in Germany, the Zeppelin University in Friedrichshafen, and my university where I'm professor, which is the National University of Singapore. So we brought real European, Asian, and American examples together. We started the different forms of capital building. It's very interesting in the discussion about investment of better infrastructures and brownfield recycling or development, that we have to look not only on the specific site and real estate development on financial capital, we also have to look what is the added values to human health, to the built capital, to the environmental topics, to the social capital, and to the symbolic capital we also have. That is getting more and more important. I just give you one example. A lot of American cities are very much run down. They have problems to get young people into the cities. So the symbolic capital means it's the image of a city. The image is very much connected to good city planning and to open space and to very good integrated solutions. Young people, when they grow up, their families, they look for a healthy environment. They look for an attractive city, which has also culture, which has a very social network, and which has a very, very good environment. And that is extremely interesting. Well, we did work also a lot on the question, you know, what is needed. And I just mentioned this very, very briefly. We have that often in Germany as very often a very complicated discussion. But what is needed for cities to be successful, you need a very, very strong leadership and a very strong vision, where you want to go, where you want to be in 25 years from now. Cultural and structural capacity means that you have to make the right regulations and you have to make it also public. It is important to get the public knowledge about knowing why environmental topics are important. If you don't do that, you have lost. Singapore, for example, with the ABC water guidelines, trying to communicate this to everyone. So every taxi driver should know what is ABC, active, beautiful, and clean water systems. I think what is also important, we have to not only see that we have to upgrade the skills and knowledge in our universities and our engineering and architectural colleagues. We also have to take any opportunity. Like you can see that in Germany when we have a big flooding on the river, I just say some river Danube, Rhine or Elbe. You have the openness to make a change, but this openness of the society and also politicians lasts only for a half a year. So after that, we go back to business as usual. No one wants to make a change. So I think opportunities are often the negative opportunities, which we have to turn to a positive opportunity, to be right on spot and bring the alternatives and bring a political will to make a change. Copenhagen did this. They had 3 times floodings in a row, and they created a cloudburst project because of the problems. I think if they would not have had these problems, probably there would not have been a change. So we have to take that opportunities all the time. Finally, what I think had to learn a lot in our teams, and I think that's really in the future more and more needed. We have to get out of the silos. We have to get out of our expertise, and we have to bring different disciplines together to make better cities and to make the environmental topics so that we can actually handle a very good future. And that needs actually a very good ways of leadership, of financing, of management, the aesthetics and the acceptance by people is really important, and we have to have the convincing arguments. And this is often not a rocket science. It's very often that we have to give opportunities that people understand simply why is it important that we need space in our cities for environmental topics. You know, in my project, I just show this as the last one here. I was so impressed about children in Singapore now in our new projects, how they play. This little boy putting his body into a little water stream experiences what it means if you can make retention or detention and you hold water back, and he loves it and he did enjoy. I have watched this little boy for at least a half an hour, and I made some pictures, and it's really fascinating about that. Well, I think that is from my side. I don't want to go over time, and maybe there are some questions. You can contact me all the time on my Dreiseitl.de. And there's much more details, of course, back on the different topics, but this should give you a little bit of an overview what I think is probably very much the future, what we have to do in our cities. So I hope it came over.
Thank you very much. I'm very impressed, especially of the international point of view from you, and it's a big project all over the world. And maybe we talk together before the webinar about also another aspect, what is importance of me, what is the importance of competitions for architects, landscape architects, or engineers, with a reference to rediscovery of urban open spaces, or rather of the design and the long-time development concept. What are your international experiences with this instrument, the instrument of competitions? Can you give some remarks?
Yeah. Yes, I think this is to integrate this kind of approach in competitions is extremely interesting and extremely important. I have been working with competitions on different sides, being directly someone who is trying to win the competition, and I was also very often members of a jury. For competitions, I think we have to integrate also much more and look for solutions when we describe, when we bring out here in the US, it's RFPs, RFIs, or RFQs. And in Germany, if we create a competition, I think we have to integrate in the question much more to encourage designers to work more holistically and to work more in a team approach. I think beside architects and urban planners, landscape architects have a very strong role and have to be also upgraded in their importance. And on the other hand, I think it is very much that engineers have to be more open for urban planning and for urban designs, and so it can be good solutions. So integrated teams in competitions, I think, is a very important part, and also to give values to integrated solutions. I think we have to ask that in competitions very, very clear. We have a lot of regulations. Sometimes I'm always giving warnings: don't make it too complicated, don't over-regulate things. I think in competitions it's important that people come up with very creative new solutions.
Okay. And finally, I want to report something about a competition here in Germany, because in Germany competitions become more and more also important, especially for communities, to find the best solution and also to find the planner, the architect or landscape architect, town planner, who will get the commission at last. One actual example of our own experience, where I managed a competition for European town planners and landscape architects by order of a small community in Bavaria, for Mainlois near Kulmbach. Maybe someone knows the famous beer, Mönchhofbräu from Kulmbach. And subject was the area of a further spinning factory with a dimension of 14 hectare place in the north of the small historic village near the river Weiser Main, and surrounded by different dwelling and industrial areas, and also in the neighborhood a local sports center here. And the task was to develop a long-time concept of revitalization of this brownfield as a new urban or rather rural area for living, working, and recreation. Also take into the consideration to actual challenges of the Energiewende and the climate change. At last, 16 teams take part in this urban design competition. Last week, the session of the jury took place and decided who are the prize winners. And there are a praise, ich hoffe, ich spreche das richtig aus, a praise or a recognition, and 3 prizes. And there are 2 reasons because I chose this example. At first is, go on back, is the bleeding for competitions, because the principle of the competition works also in small or medium towns and also for unspectacular or seeming simple tasks. But most of the local authorities in small and medium towns often don't know anything about this opportunity. That's why, for example, also the Chamber of Architects in Thuringia advertise for competitions as an established instrument for high-quality Baukultur, so we call it in Germany, or respective high quality in culture of planning. And the diversity of solutions for this kind, 16 different solutions for the same problem or task, are always unexpectedly large, especially from the perspective of the local authorities. They are often amazed and pleasantly surprised. And the second reason is pleading for lively open spaces. And if I show you the 4 prizes, here the praise and the 3rd prize and the 2nd prize, and at last the 1st prize, is that lively open spaces also in small and medium towns. There's a still and demand of well-designed and various usable open spaces, respective to the spirit of the place. And there's an increasing demand of climate-ready and livable open spaces also in this small and medium town. And because expect of the proposal of working places and the diversity of housing supply, the quality of open spaces in town and in the neighborhood, and also in the surrounding and in the region, become more and more important for people to decide where they will live. And at the same time, the question of economic efficiency become more and more important for communities which have to build and maintain the public open spaces, especially with a view of the challenges of climate change and, for example, with storm and heavy rain you show us before. And there's also another aspect. This is the last chart. And there's also another aspect which I can show in this example. From the point of view of the communities, not only the result of the end of a long-time development is important, also the way to achieve this final stadium. And so we also ask in this competition for the phases which are necessary or possible to get step by step acceptable situations, especially for the people which are able and willing to do first steps with investment or with leasing a dwelling house or a trading area. And that's I want to show on this example the opportunities of competitions to find out best solutions, and also the planners also for such a task, such a small or medium town. Yes, those are my point of view here in another scale, but I think it's also comparable. You mentioned the situations in big cities in Asia, America, or Europe, and you find out that the Tasten are the same, and I can, how to say it, have the same impressions that it is the same topics in also in small and medium towns, for example, here in Germany. That's,
yeah, and Mr. Quas, I think this is very, very nice what you shared here with the examples on competitions, and also seeing the solutions are very, very strong about bringing actually the city planning, the buildings, the open space, and the greenery, and also the water story very much together as one unit. I think that's very good. The big challenge we have around the world is that we have to really bring competitions to a much higher level, also to encourage cities to do more competitions, because I have been working in many regions of the world where they don't do any competitions, where they don't do any thoughtful planning, where they just have developers who just want to build as quick as possible. India is, for example, or China is some of these examples. China is changing a lot, but in India, you have the problem. There is no planner, no competition, and that's how the cities then look like.
Okay.
So there's a lot. There's a lot what there has to be done to convince that thoughtful planning is really helping to shape also a better society.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much. I think that will be the last conclusion for today. Thank you very much for your webinar and for your that you can get to do it early in the morning in Seattle. And thank you very much. And I hope we will meet each other on another place everywhere in the world, maybe also here in Germany and on the Bodensee.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We are back in summer. We are back in summer, so I will now jump back to the conference, and I'm really looking forward to reconnect and keep the network flowing. We do a lot in Germany as well, and I love to. My home is actually Überlingen on the Bodensee, and that's where my family is, and I'm very strong connected still. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, and all the people which are with us in this webinar. Thank you and goodbye. Have a nice day.